In this video, you'll learn how to create a fully responsive menu like this from scratch in just a few minutes. What is up, everyone? Welcome to another tutorial. It's G here, and today I'm going to show you my process of creating a menu from scratch here in Framer and making it responsive, making sure it adapts to every single screen size. So let's get right into it. The first thing that I'm going to do here is press F on my keyboard so we can draw a frame. Let's do that. And since I already have content on my page, if I open the layers panel, I actually want to drag this frame outside of the hero stack. Okay, so now it's a standalone frame and I can move it around freely. The first thing here is changing the width to fill, so it takes up the whole screen, and we're not going to worry about the height for now. What I'm going to do is change the fill color, which is the background color there, to black. And I'm also going to click on the plus sign next to layout to turn this frame into a stack. So now the elements inside this stack, which is our header, can have a relative position. For this simple header, I want a logo on the left, a couple of menu items, and a button on the right. Let's start with the logo. I am going to copy and paste it in our header, and we can start adding the menu links. For this, I'm going to press T on my keyboard to add a text layer. And our first menu item is going to be called resources. Let me change the color to white and also the weight to semi-bold. I'm also going to wrap this in a new stack so we can add a background color on hover. Let's right click, select add stack. And here I can either change the width manually to fit content or simply press Shift A on my keyboard so the stack that's around my text layer fits the content inside. I am also going to add 6 pixels of padding on the top and on the bottom, and 12 pixels on the right and on the left. Now that we have our structure ready to go, I can right click on this new stack and create a component. Let's call this menu item. And this is going to be our desktop variant. And for this menu item, I want to create a hover state with a very light background color, like I said. To set that up, I'm going to the default variant, adding a white background. Let's increase the border radius to maybe 8 pixels. But on the default variant, I'm going to set the opacity to 0. And in the hover state, let's set it to 10%. Let's see how it looks. Perfect. Now, since this is a button or a link, you also want to create variables for the content inside and also the link itself. So let's do that. First, I'm going to select the text layer. Next to content, click on the plus sign and create a plain text variable. Let's call this button text. And before moving to the other variable, another thing that I always like to do is go to the Styles tab and make sure that the user select is set to none. This is just so the user is not able to select the text and creates a better experience overall. And lastly, this is not going to matter in this tutorial, but in a real project, you always want to create a variable for the link as well. So with the entire variant selected, I can go to link, click on the plus sign again, and create a variable. Perfect. Let's go back to our header, duplicate this menu item a few times. And now, as you can see on the right panel, we have control over the 2 variables that we created. For this tutorial, I'm of course only going to change the button text. I also want a button on the right side here. For this, we're going to basically do the same thing. So I'm going to press T on my keyboard, right sign up. Let's just change the color so you can see what I'm doing. Actually, one thing that I think is a little better for this button right here is if we decrease the opacity of the actual text layer in the default variant, then increase this to 100% on the hover state. Yeah, I think this looks a little bit better. But going back to our sign up button, same thing. I'm going to wrap this in a new stack. So right click, add stack, Shift A, so my stack wraps around the content. And let's increase the padding 12 pixels on the top, and maybe 24 on the right and on the left. I'm going to set a white background color with 8 pixels of border radius. I think I can decrease the padding on the top and on the bottom. And I'm also going to change color of the text to black. And again, since this is a button and you might want to reuse this multiple times throughout your project, I'm going to turn this into a component as well. Let's call it button. And this is also our desktop variant. And here I'm going to create a simple hover state and decrease the opacity. And same thing here. You also want to create a variable for the button text. Make sure that the user select set to none and create a variable for the link as well. Perfect. Now we can start fixing the position of these elements. There are several ways that you can style a header. I'm going to stick with a very basic setup with the logo on the left and the menu items and the button on the right. So first, I am going to select all of these elements. I selected all of them holding Shift. Then I can click on Add Stack because now I can simply change the distribution to the end. Now, one thing here that you might not notice in a smaller breakpoint, but it's very important to keep in mind. If I hit the preview and increase the screen width, the elements are going to be pushed away to the side. And there are cases where you might want to use this kind of layout, but usually I prefer to work with a max width for the content. So let's do that. I am going to select my logo and the stack that groups all of these elements together and wrap them in the new stack, because now let's rename this to AB content. Now I can set a max width for the content stack, maybe about 1100 pixels. And if I go to my preview again, it doesn't matter how wide the screen is, the content is only going to stretch up to 1100 pixels. We can already change the height to fit content. And I'm going to select the content stack and increase the padding on the top and on the bottom. Perfect. Our desktop version is looking great. Basically, it's already finished, but now, of course, we have to turn this into a responsive menu to make sure it looks good on all screen sizes. First, let's turn our header into a component. So right-click, create component. Let's call it header. I'm going to delete these other variants for now. And before we move on to the responsive version, what I usually like doing is adding the mobile open and close button to the primary variant as well, just so it makes things a little bit easier down the line. Let's create that manually. I'm going to press F on my keyboard to draw a frame. I'm holding Shift to make sure it maintains the aspect ratio. So let's say 30 pixels of width and height. And here I am going to remove the background color, and let's manually create our hamburger icon. So again, I'm going to press F on my keyboard to draw a frame, maybe something like this. I'm going to change the color to white, increase the border radius so we get these round corners. I can then duplicate this frame, making sure they're both perfectly centered. And now I am going to turn this into a component. So let's call this little menu icon. And I'm going to right click and create component. We can then use this as our open icon and create a variant for the close icon. For this, I'm going to manually rotate our frames 45 degrees and selecting both of them, making sure, again, they are perfectly centered. And this is going to be our close icon. And the reason why I created these icons manually instead of adding a pre-built icon is because if we set up the interactions between these two, let me show you real quick. Now we have this beautiful animation. Framer does a fantastic job of animating the frames between the two variants. So in my opinion, it's definitely worth the extra effort. Let's remove the interactions that I added. Great. Now that we have our mobile icon, I am going to add this right next to my logo and wrap them in a new stack. Just making sure that the distribution is set to the start, so the elements are aligned to the left. And lastly, of course, I want to hide this button in the primary variant so we can turn off the visibility. I just noticed that the menu links are getting cut off, and this is because our new stack, which is the logo plus mobile icon, has the width set to fill, and we don't need that. We can actually change this to fit content. Now that everything's in place, we can duplicate this variant to create our mobile header. And first, I am going to change the width to 400 pixels just so we get an idea of how it's going to look on a smaller screen. And first, with the content stack selected, I'm going to change the direction so the elements stack on top of each other, and do the same thing for the stack that groups the menu items and the button. Change the direction as well. It's already looking a lot better. And since we added the menu icon in our primary variant, it gets carried over to this other variant as well. So all we have to do is right click, hit show. Now I can select the stack that groups them together, change the width to fill, and change the distribution to space between. Perfect. And again, the styling of this header is totally up to you. What I'm going to do is maybe reduce the size of the logo a little bit. Let's adjust the padding as well. So let's set maybe 20 pixels on all sides. I am also going to change the alignment of these elements to the left. I think it looks better. And let's increase the padding a little bit on the top. You can either keep the button here, maybe even make it fill the entire screen, totally up to you. You can hide it if you want. But one thing that's very important here is making sure that you have changed the variant of our menu icon to the closed one. And that's pretty much it. This is obviously the opened version of our header. And in this case, you want to create another variant with the elements inside hidden. So let's disable the visibility of these items, replace the variant of our menu icon. And lastly, we want to set up the interactions between these two headers. So this is our mobile header closed. And let's select the trigger, which is the menu icon, of course. Press L on my keyboard. Select this other variant. I want the interaction to trigger on click. And same thing here. I'm going to press L on my keyboard and select the other variant. Let's see how it looks. Perfect. We have a fully functioning, beautiful, responsive header. Going back to our main page, let's make sure we selected the correct variant for the smaller screen sizes, which is the mobile header closed. And lastly, I'm also going to change the position of the entire header to fixed. So when we scroll down, it stays fixed on the page, but always remember to activate the left and right pins as well. Let's see how it looks. Hover stays working perfectly in the desktop version, as well as the max width that we set for our content. And when I switch to a smaller screen size, we have the other version of our header. And of course, clicking on the menu icon opens our menu. So everything is working as expected. I really like the animation that we created here for our menu icon. Another cool thing that I usually like to do, kind of depends on the project, but I also like to set a minimum height for the open version of our mobile header. So let's do that. Let's set a minimum height of 100% of the viewport height. So basically, this means that now when I open my menu, it's going to take up the whole screen. Of course, now our content is aligned to the middle here. And in order to fix that, you can simply click on the variant and change the alignment to the top. Now let's go back. And it's fixed to the top. I really like this layout as well. And now that you've mastered creating responsive menus from scratch the right way, make sure to check out this other video where I explain how dropdowns work so you can create amazing menus. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.